This is part two in our discussion of how to develop a Christian worldview philosophy of technology, and especially thinking about technology in education. There is so much available today to us and our students in education when it comes to technology. So many available resources. How do we discern which ones we should be taking advantage of, and which ones we should be letting go of? And how can we best use technology to enhance what we're doing in education? That's somewhat the topic and the emphasis of what we're talking about in this unit. So let's begin part number two, developing a Christian worldview of technology in education. Well, as we think about this topic, let's review just a little bit, thinking about what we talked about in our previous video on developing this worldview. There are many benefits of technology. And so as we think about our first job description, what God's intention was for man as he told us to go out and replenish the earth, to continue on the path of creativity with what he started in the natural world, to be a technologist, a techie, if you will. God gave us that job to be innovators, to be creators. And yet we also need to remember that technology then should then continue on that work, that path that God set us on. It shouldn't just be simply for entertaining or for making us not certainly for making us more lazy or unproductive, but to help us produce more and to do more with the natural world. This is a desire that God gave to all people because Jesus himself was a technologist. He was a creator. And as we follow along his path, his guidance, his leadership, and be more like Jesus Christ himself, the more we can do to be technologists, the better we are being conformed to the very image of Christ. But there are many angles in which we can understand technology and its effect on us. And so let's continue developing this philosophy of a Christian worldview about technology and then apply it to education. First of all, I'd like to think about this fact that technology is an art. Technology is an art. Technology produces shiny new stuff. And in other avenues of art, the idea of technology comes to the surface in that we are using creative acts to bring order to what would otherwise be chaos. And art is often referred to as ideas being made manifest. And as we think about technology, it's really more art than it is sometimes science, to the extent that we're dealing with human ingenuity, human creativity, the thoughts and the ideas that are in people's minds coming to the surface. And so new things often begin with creative insights, creative thoughts. And the Gutenberg press is a great example. Gutenberg wanted a way to mass produce the Bible. And so he started thinking about it. And he came up with the idea, and what he did was he mimicked a wine press in which he would take paper and ink and mash them together, and he had himself a printing press. But that was a form of art in the sense that it came from his creative mind. Technology is then an art. An iPod, a laptop computer, a smartphone. These are what we usually think of when we think of technology, but technology also includes Shakespeare's plays, his writings. Technology would also be, Bach's fugue in G minor. These are creative outgrowths of people's thoughts and people's minds. And those are just as much technology as the electronic devices that we think of. So technology is an art. It is something produced by the mind. Well, second of all, technology is, of course, applied science. And in applied science, we are often looking for a solution to a problem. In fact, sometimes with technology, we care little about how something works. We care more about the problem that it solves and how it can make my life better. And this is evident in the fact that when we get apps or when we find devices, we don't really care too much about how they work. We just want to, we want to download them and go and be on our merry way solving the problem or fixing the thing that we set out to do. And yet science uncovers real world principles, like gravity. Science gives us empirical data on the natural world. And so technology then also helps us overcome the natural world. Rocket ships were invented to overcome gravity, something else that science discovered. And so we as human beings can be completely ignorant of how things work, but we can be entirely enthusiastic about the fact that they do work and that they make our lives more rich or more beneficial or more productive. We don't necessarily care about how things necessarily work. And it's interesting that the United States in recent years it's been published and talked about how America is falling behind other countries of the world in STEM pursuits, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. For example, we have fallen behind China in STEM degrees and STEM jobs. And yet the United States continues to be the #1 consumer of devices like iPods and iPads. America is not as interested in how things work as much as we are interested in that they work and that they entertain and that they make our lives more fun sometimes. And so we relish these results and we ask ourselves, what can this new thing do for me? How can it make my life better, more entertained, make me a little bit less hardworking sometimes? I don't necessarily care how it works. And so technology is definitely is involved with applied science. And yet we have to understand this. Technologies are not neutral then, because the mind is not. Technology is an outgrowth of the mind. It's an art form. It is a way to solve problems. It's applied science. But technology is definitely not neutral because it comes from a non-neutral source, which is our mind. It's therefore far from neutral. And so when people invent things, they have a purpose for why they make what they make. And so technology is a good reflection on man's ability, his potential for both beauty and for great wickedness. Take the example of manned flight. When Orville and Wilbur Wright first invented the airplane, it was intended for good. It was a beautiful thing. And yet on December 7th, 1941, at Pearl Harbor, manned flight was a horrific thing. And so technology continues to expose the fact that the human mind is capable of great goodness and yet also great wickedness. Technologies tend to change and affect the environment for which they were created and to which they are introduced. And so technologies reshape people. They change the way that we think. They change what we're capable of doing. And in so doing, we have a new concept sometimes of what is normal. For us, we don't think twice about an alarm clock. We don't think twice anymore about a cell phone. We don't think twice about a television set or a DVD player or lights or running water. We have become accustomed to these things. And so technology has a way to alter our sensibilities, to make us have a new sense of what is normal. And so technology then, we could say, redefines its users. It has the power to change the way that we think. And so anything that has the ability to change the way that people think ought to be taken very, very seriously. Our faith in technology should never be blind. We should never be blindly accepting of anything that carries the label of new technology because it has such tremendous power. It must be handled carefully. I want to read a quick quote from Kevin Kelly, who was the editor of Wired magazine years ago, and he says this about the ability of technology to fill this gap in people's lives. And some people have called it the gap of religion between religion and faith. He says this: because values and meaning are scarce today, technology will make our decisions for us. We'll listen to technology because our modern ears listen to little else. In the absence of other firm beliefs, we'll let technology steer. No other force is as powerful in shaping our destiny. By imagining what technology wants, we can imagine the course of our culture. So what Kelly was getting across here, the point that he was making, is that technology can become a religion. In fact, it can be called the new religion because it's changes the way that a culture makes sense of the world and what our faith is put in. And so technology is definitely not neutral, and it must be handled very carefully and with restraint at times. Technology is also not a cure-all. It's not a panacea. It can't fix all problems. although sometimes it fixes many problems. Sometimes we take the false assumption that technology can fix all of our problems. A couple of examples. When Jonas Salk invented the solution to polio, the polio vaccine, he gave it away for free. He gave it away so that there could be a solution to polio, and he helped millions and millions of people. When the mosquito net was invented, it kept people from getting malaria. Technology then can sometimes be seen as a solution to all problems, but there are many times where technology doesn't solve problems. Thinking about education. In educational technology for the last several years, there have been many programs in which students have been given computers. There's been a one laptop per child initiative in some places. And yet the research shows in those areas there's very little increase in actual learning. It turns out that the people that are pushing those programs are oftentimes the companies selling the products. They're making a profit off of that initiative. And so technology doesn't just solve problems all by itself. It is still the people implementing the technology that make the difference. There will never be a time in education or in society or in culture or in any other industry in which people will not be needed. Now, certainly, there are some technologies in which people and their jobs have been replaced with robots or technologies or things like that. But there will never be a time in which technology can teach people to be more Christ-like. People will always be needed to do that. So there will always be a place for people, and technology cannot solve all the problems that people have. There will still be a need for spiritual guidance, spiritual leadership, and technology cannot provide that. And so as we think about what technology can and can't do, it's important for us to remind us that technology is more than just the products that are created. There's a context to everything that's made. And we have to be careful not just to blindly accept every new thing that comes along. And technology these days can be quite complex. And the parts are concealed. The circuit boards are beyond most of our understanding. If we pulled one of those devices apart, a computer apart, we wouldn't know the first thing about how it's actually working inside. Years ago when people would work on cars, when cars were made in America, they were known for huge engine blocks. You could pop open the hood and you could crawl inside there and work on the engine. And not so anymore. I mean, engines are smaller and smaller, and you've got to really, be very flexible to get in there and work on that engine. So there's less and less understanding about what's going on inside of these devices. And so sometimes we don't necessarily care if we don't understand it. We don't understand it, so we can't fix it. And so if these things aren't working, what do we do? Well, if my laptop computer bites the dust and quits working, I'm probably just going to go out and buy a new one. I'm going to toss the old one and go buy something new. And now I've got a nice new flashy, shiny new device, and I'm happy again. But this reveals somewhat the mentality that we are so fixed on consumption and rather than comprehension. I'm very ready to consume more and more technology, more and more products. I'm not necessarily concerned about how they work. I don't necessarily comprehend all of them. And so sometimes we get cut off from the context of technologies. And we don't have any idea where they came from or how they were invented necessarily. That's not necessarily such a bad thing, but here's the point. Our blind acceptance of how things work can sometimes lead us to blind acceptance of what they're doing. And we accept them, and we don't necessarily think twice about what they're doing to our minds or to our children's minds or to our students' minds. And yet technology gets us into a rush sometimes to consume, and not think necessarily as clearly as we ought to about what technology is doing to our minds and how it's making us think. Technology then is a tyrant. It can become very problematic for us. There was an invention several decades ago, I suppose now, called a pager. You're probably familiar with what a pager is. And it was originally invented to track salesmen as they would travel across the United States or other areas of the world. so their boss could check up on them and send them a page and request them to call him so he could check up on their productivity. Became somewhat of a digital leash. And you know that feeling today if you carry a smartphone or a cell phone and people are always able to get hold of us. Technology can become somewhat of a tyrant. And this is proved by our expectations for other people. Let me give you an example. Have you ever sent an email or a text message or a digital note to someone and they didn't respond right away? And what is our response to that? We get upset when people don't respond right away. If I don't get a response to an email or to a text message within a few seconds, I begin to question, what's wrong with that person? Are they mad at me? Why aren't they responding to me? And we become servants to our technology. We get very impatient. We feel the need to personally be connected at all times and to be available and to be able to check up on our Facebook accounts and our text messages and our phone messages and our voicemails and our emails. And if we don't have that capability, we feel out of the loop, and no one wants to feel that way. And so we feel this compulsion to constantly be checking text messages and Facebook posts and emails. And there's a certain irony here about technology that's just incredible. Technology is invented, devices are invented to make our lives better, make our schedules more manageable, make our relationships better. And yet technology can make us feel so harried and so hurried and so out of control. It's the complete opposite of what technology is intended to do, to make our lives easier sometimes. And the fruits of technology then are oftentimes ingratitude, very little appreciation for past difficulties and overcoming, things that we don't think twice about now. The fruit of technology is often also impatience, in that we are never satisfied with the speed of our devices or the speed of the internet or the speed of our connection or the speed of our Wi-Fi, and we grow impatient. And so we ask ourselves, does this technology bring out the fruits of the Spirit? Is it making me more like Christ, or is it making me less like Jesus Christ? Is it making me more reclusive? Is it making me less sociable? Is it giving me less self-control? Am I being drawn to more gossip, to more lust, to more laziness? And these are very valuable questions for us to be asking when it comes to technology, especially dealing with young people in our classrooms. Technology can certainly be a tyrant. Well, technology is about control. And the systematic process of trying to get everything under control is really what technology is all about. When we pave a road, when man builds a dam, when we clean the house, we are trying to bring order out of chaos. And this is a good thing. This is God's plan for things to be orderly. We serve a very orderly God. And being in the image of God, we ought to be interested in bringing control to the world. When God made the world, it was formless and empty, and then He made light from dark, and He brought day from out of night, and He set the earth separate from the sky. And so God is a God of orderliness, and He calls order a good thing. And technology as an industry is so driven because there will always be something more to try to control. The world will continue to be chaotic. There will always be something more to bring order to. And so there will always be more problems to solve. And so when we're trying to get things under control, we are being human beings, and we are subduing the earth that God gave us. He told us, bring the earth into subjection. And God is pleased when we have a rulership. This is one of His jobs that He gave us in Genesis chapter 1. And the benevolence that we can show towards others is a great thing. And yet technology can also be used to take advantage of others for personal gain. And so how can we use technology to keep chaos at bay while still serving other people and harnessing the natural world? So that's something about technology, that there will always be more to control. We get sometimes in a rush to have all the technologies and to understand them all, to get all the apps and to use technology, and more and more and more and more and more. We have to understand there will always be more to attempt to control. There will never be a shortage of chaos, and our attempt sometimes to understand all technology or to have all technology really is an endless pursuit. because there will always be more problems to attempt to solve. So as we apply this to education, this Christian worldview of technology, as we apply this to education, are we using technology in our classrooms just because we can? Just because it's there? Or do we have a clear philosophy of educational technology in which we are using it to increase learning, to increase productivity, or are we just using it to entertain? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with some entertainment in education. I want kids in my classroom, I want kids in my school to have fun. Education should be enjoyable. And yet entertainment is not obviously the purpose of education. And so when I'm just seeking to entertain, I'm probably not using technology the way that I ought to be. A couple quick tips here for using technology in education as we deal with this pressure to embrace educational technology. Let's make sure we keep in mind what God intended when He told us to be tectones, when He told us to replenish the earth, to build cultures, to make the world better, to continue His creative work. We need to make sure that we're using technology to make the world better for other people, not just ourselves. If I use technology to make my life easier, less productive, more entertaining, I'm probably not using technology in a way that pleases the Creator. I need to be careful about that. I need to use technology to make sure I understand God's world better, to bring more learning to the environment, to learn more about the natural world, not just to be entertained by it. Again, I want to make sure I'm increasing productivity and that I'm creating God's creative work that He intended when He told us to go out and to replenish the earth that He created, that He gave us to enjoy. And so as we think about this philosophy of technology, our philosophy of technology will define and determine what we do with technology. And oftentimes, technology is used to subdue children. Unfortunately, it's used sometimes to entertain children, to get them off of our workload. And yet, technology that relieves us of God-given responsibility, I would have to say, is displeasing to God. Let's make sure we're never using educational technology simply just to relieve us of the hard work of teaching and loving children and helping them understand. I want to leave you with this quote. This is by an author named Craig Detweiler. He wrote a book called iGods. And it's a fantastic book about the influence of technology on children and on our culture. He says this: adults often blindly place technologies in the hands of children without first giving thought to the potential changes that could take place in their minds and practices. We train kids to look down rather than up. That's a great thought. Are we using technology to teach children to withdraw, to be a party of one, to be solo? Or are we using technology to really increase their learning, increase their understanding, to make them more productive creatures of their Heavenly Father? There's a real irony here, I think, in educational technology that we want education to be about learning and about thinking, and yet sometimes we ourselves can view technology with a thoughtless embrace. And we want to make sure then that we are making plans to use technology in a way that pleases God, in a way that is well thought out, with a biblical worldview, and with the goal of making God's creatures more productive for His benefit and His service.